Ahsoka season 1, and probably the only season, just finished about a week and a half ago, and I wanted to talk about it now that we have the show in its entire context. I would sum up this show in a similar way that I talked about the Kenobi show, which is that they wasted a lot of opportunities, and even though people in the reaction videos will be super jacked about it, and it'll trend on social media, I don't think it'll have a long shelf life. And in probably 6 months, maybe even like 2, I think it's going to be largely forgotten. And a quick example of what I'm talking about is how people were freaking out about Hayden Christensen being in this show. And the way that they were reacting is like they had forgotten that he had just shown up a year ago in Kenobi. It's a very strange phenomenon to watch. This video is going to be broken into 4 parts. I'll try to bookmark it in the comments. The main focus is going to be the plot, the damage that I think they did to the characters, and I think the damage they've done to the universe of Star Wars. And the 4th part is going to be me talking about tweaks that I think they could have made that would have significantly improved the show without really changing much. And I think it would have made it a lot more interesting, because I like to at least consider other options for what could have been done since I'm criticizing it. For me, for most bad shows, I can live with some acting, I can live with bad CGI, but the stuff that I really hate is when the writing is bad. And the characters in this season don't really have any arcs, they don't learn any lessons. There's huge coincidences all throughout the season that allow the story to continue instead of the characters' actions leading to the next event in the story. The characters have pretty much no common sense. The story doesn't really progress in any meaningful way from the first episode to the 8th. I think the whole season could have been accomplished in like 2 hours, or even just started with Ahsoka and Sabine arriving in the other galaxy and then Thrawn making his way back and going from there. And I believe that the changes they made to the Force actually kind of destroy the original trilogy and the prequels and the Star Wars universe in general. And I know there's been a lot of debate, and I'm going to do that later when I get into the world building stuff in detail. The fighting and choreography were abysmal. For the positives, they got the details right for a lot of stuff. I like the costumes. I think the special effects were mostly pretty good. The soundtrack was Kevin Kiner, who did Rebels. He did a very good job, although I accidentally called him Kelvin Klein in my other video because I couldn't remember his name. Whoops. It was good to see Hayden again, even if it didn't really have much meaning and was a huge missed opportunity and the whole thing was kind of shallow. Even with all the issues that I have with it, I think there were a lot of interesting possibilities that just didn't manifest on the screen. So I'm going to name some later. That'll be the last part of the video. And I'm hoping this will only take like 10 minutes, but no promises. But I think when you hear it all at once instead of week to week, you can really see how many coincidences and contrivances are just stacked up on each other for the events to even happen in a story. When you go week to week, I feel like people kind of forget the specifics of each episode and are just willing to overlook a lot. I have more detailed reviews of the episode each week if you want to go look at those. I'm going to stick to the big stuff for this. Those cover kind of everything that I thought, at least right when I watched it. So episode 1. The entire story hinges on this Eye of Sion, which is clearly a Lord of the Rings reference, and there's like a million of these throughout the season. We have no idea why this exists. We have no idea why it leads specifically to Thrawn. And I'm just going to go fast, but I want to emphasize that this is what your whole story hinges on. A puzzle orb in some kind of tomb with a map to the character of importance. Why does this exist? Who created it? Why did they create it, hide it, and leave it here? No clue. How does Ahsoka know it's here? No clue. But she shows up, solves the simplest puzzle in the world in like 10 minutes, and then gets attacked by droids who try to blow themselves up when they actually want to get a hold of the map. And they actually needed this map for their witch magic to work later on. So I don't know why they self-destructed like nuclear explosions. Ahsoka goes to Hera to take this orb to Sabine because apparently she's the only person who can solve simple puzzles. They don't have any resources in the government that she can use. After being told not to, Sabine steals it, then has it stolen by Shin. And then of course, Shin stabs Sabine. She runs her through with a lightsaber and Sabine's fine the next day. No big deal. Episode 2. Luckily, one of the droids stays behind for no apparent reason, and Ahsoka is able to kill it and cut off its head. They use this to go to the place it was made, where luckily all of the workers there are Empire loyalists, and luckily they're sending off the last piece of the hyperspace ring, and very fortunately they let Hera fly right next to them and watch Chopper throw a tracker on it so that they can find this hyperspace ring when they never would have been aware of it before. Episode 3, Hera talks to the Council about the threat of Thrawn and wants resources, and the Council ignores presumably their highest ranking and most trusted general and denies the request. When Sabine and Ahsoka arrive at the hyperspace ring, there are 6 enemy fighters waiting for them to arrive for some reason. and they chase them for about 10 minutes without the ship taking any damage, until conveniently the ship is damaged in a way where it drifts into the center of the hyperspace ring, which must be the only thing ever created that can't defend the center of itself. And again, very fortunately, the fighters are so stupid that they fly close enough for Ahsoka to run out onto the outside of the ship and cut them down with lightsabers instead of just floating there and blowing the ship up. And because Sabine is awesome, she fixes it in 30 seconds so that they can keep going. And conveniently, the Purrgil are just chilling in the clouds of this planet so that they actually have something that they can fly in between and protect themselves until they can get down to the planet and hide. And that's how episode 3 happens. Episode 4, Hera, being the great general and mother that she is, takes a crew and disobeys direct orders from the council to go to Ahsoka and Sabine and brings her son into what she thinks is a war zone. Baylan, Shin, and Morgan Elsbeth start powering up their map because it needs to be powered up with witch magic for some reason. And all good maps need to be powered up with witch magic from the Force that almost no one uses. Ahsoka kills Merrick, who is a fart cloud or something, and Sabine, despite not being able to use the Force, is able to hold off Shin until Shin runs away. Ahsoka goes to stop Baylan from the map fully uploading, doesn't use the Force to grab the orb or the lightsaber to cut it in half, and she grabs it with her hand and burns her hand, so now she has to fight with one saber. Thanks to this idiocy of not using her lightsabers, Baylan is able to overpower her and knock her off a cliff. Shin, who's laying there knocked out because Ahsoka actually used the Force, unlike Shin did against Sabine, leaves Baylan and Sabine to discuss what to do with the orb because Sabine takes it hostage. Sabine has a chance to destroy the orb, but Baylan talks her into giving it to him and says that he'll keep his word, even though Sabine knows nothing about him other than she thinks that he just killed Ahsoka and is some kind of dark Jedi or possibly a Sith. But she takes his word anyway and gives him the orb on the off chance that he'll keep it and the off chance that Ezra is actually still alive. Episode 5. Because Hera brought her child Jason into a war zone, he has the Force and he can hear the lightsaber duel that's in Ahsoka's mind somehow. And for some reason, Hera can also hear it. Ahsoka learns the very valuable lesson of live or die and chooses to live. Somehow Chopper can scan better than their ships, so they are able to find Ahsoka like 10 feet under the water after an entire day. Now she's Ahsoka the White. Fortunately, Baylan left the map orb behind in 2 pieces, and she was able to sense the past through the Force to the point where she could hear a very specific and entire conversation. So she knows that Sabine was at least alive when she left with Baylan. Since she has no plan and no hyperspace ring, she goes and communicates through the Force with the Purrgil, and her and Hu Yang get into the mouth of the biggest Purrgil with the hope of it taking them to the right place in another galaxy, hopefully to the right system and the right planet, so that Ezra might be alive. Spoiler, it does. Episode 6. Morgan Elsbeth ends up in another galaxy exactly where Thrawn is, thanks to this very specific map, and meets the Great Mothers there, who are the origin of the Dathomir witches, apparently. Thrawn makes a very grandiose entrance and is somehow fat after they've been living on bare essentials for a decade, presumably. Luckily for Sabine, Thrawn's fat ass agrees to honor the deal and let her go look for Ezra before he kills them both. Of course, he doesn't tell her the part about killing them both, but we see that because he's a mustache-twirling evil villain. He makes it clear over and over, you should never underestimate the Jedi. So why Ezra is alive after 10 years without sending ships to kill him? Don't know. Why not send platoons of squads after him when he has no lightsaber? Don't know. Why not offer him a deal to cooperate with him as long as they're stuck in this galaxy? Who knows? Only a true tactical fucking genius could make these decisions. They give Sabine a howler, provisions, and her weapons, and a howler is an alien dog wolf thing. She walks on her howler for like an hour and gets attacked by bandits. She has no helmet on because she left it in the other galaxy. But they don't hit her anywhere except for the plot armor, and she kills them with blasters and a lightsaber, including deflecting blaster bolts back into their faces, even though she can't use the Force. She walks for like another hour after giving her dog a lecture for being scared of guns, and the dog smells a rock that turns out to be an alien hermit crab called a Noti. And conveniently, the alien hermit crab is living with Ezra. So after a decade, Sabine finds Ezra in a couple hours, maybe half a day, and Thrawn just never bothered to do shit about him. I mean, luckily, he was only half a day away on the same planet, and the first alien that she interacted with was a peaceful one who happened to be one of his bros. Anyway, We get a reunion that looks like he was gone for the weekend, as opposed to probably dead for an entire decade in another galaxy. Thrawn sends Baylan and Shin after Ezra and Sabine because he doesn't care if they all get stranded there. And since he doesn't care if they all get stranded there, instead of just leaving them alone, he decides to waste more resources before going back to his own galaxy, where they desperately need fighting power. Episode 7. Hera is on trial for stealing government resources, i.e. pilots, after she directly went against the decision of the council, and for some reason, a part of the trial isn't taking into account that she took her child into a war zone. Luckily, her and Leia engage in nepotism and corruption so that she gets to own one of the guys in the council, and we get a meaningless C-3PO cameo to relay Leia's message. We see Ahsoka training with hollows from Anakin because they need to milk Hayden Christensen dry. And what do you know? The whale took her and Hu Yang to the exact planet in another galaxy that she needs to get to. Thrawn actually did something that was common sense and makes a minefield at the entry point of where the hyperspace lane ends. But they don't blow up any Purrgil or even damage Ahsoka's ship, so she escapes. Sabine, again, refuses to inform Ezra about anything, so we don't get any actual tension or drama that could have taken place, and instead we get generic dialogue about garbage until bandits show up and attack the hermit crabs. Ahsoka escapes through a field of floating Purrgil bones in space, and Ezra and Sabine and the hermit crabs get surrounded by the bandits, but not really an issue since Sabine took out like 10 by herself. Hu Yang drops Ahsoka nearby, and Baylan is waiting for her at this random location in an open field, so that we get another shitty duel in an open field between Baylan and Ahsoka. While Ahsoka is dealing with Baylan, Sabine and Ezra fight Shin, but because the writers don't want Sabine to be overshadowed by Ezra, who, is an actual Force-using Jedi, Sabine carries 2 guns and a lightsaber while Ezra fights with nothing. Thrawn again does something that should be common sense and surrounds Ezra and Sabine, but Shin hesitates to fire so that we get a shitty joke, and in the meantime, Ahsoka has escaped from Baylan and jumps in, and the 50 stormtroopers become cannon fodder, so Ezra and Sabine fight until Shin runs away, and the stormtroopers run away after wasting their lives for no reason. Also, after refusing the lightsaber against Shin, Ezra takes up a blaster rifle from a dead stormtrooper and starts firing. Ezra and Ahsoka have a more emotional reunion than Sabine and Ezra did, and Thrawn is good to go back to the main galaxy to end Episode 7. Episode 8, the grand finale. Morgan Elsbeth gets a magic upgrade and also a special magic blade created by the Great Mothers, while Ezra creates a lightsaber. Sabine and Ezra and Ahsoka don't really address how big of a fuck up she made, because that would be consequences, and screw that. Thrawn sends 2 fighters to attack Ahsoka's ship because 6 fighters and mounted gun turrets didn't work, 3 fighters didn't work, but luckily the ship knew it was time to be dramatic, so 2 fighters does stop the ship and it goes down. Ezra, Sabine, and Ahsoka ride their howlers to get to Thrawn before he leaves, because now there's a sense of urgency, even though they were just hanging out with the crabs going like 2 miles an hour before. And the Star Destroyer shoots at them as they charge it, but fuck it, they're good to go. At this point, Sabine is a full-blown Force user by now, so they kill like 100 stormtroopers in the most boring way possible, mainly by standing in a large empty room. Ahsoka and Ezra use their lightsabers as shields, and Sabine has her lightsaber plus Beskar, so she's essentially a god. The witches use their version of the Force to zombify the troopers, and even though they have lightsabers, it's supposed to be scary, I guess. Anyway, they run away, and now Morgan Elsbeth has another samurai duel with Ahsoka as some kind of boss fight until a bunch of stormtroopers show up. Also, while 3 Jedi are running wild, at no point does Thrawn say, hey, close all the doors. They're just kind of wide open in the stairwells and they walk right through them, and then they close the doors behind them. Ezra and Sabine get their ass whipped by a couple of the special troopers, and Sabine saves them with the Force and her lightsaber. Ezra jumps, and Sabine Force pushes him like 150 meters across a huge chasm so that he can get on board the ship, but then she chooses to turn around and stay in this stupid galaxy with Ahsoka after she literally sacrificed the other galaxy to be with Ezra when she didn't even know if he was alive. But fuck it, I guess. Ahsoka and Morgan Elsbeth continue their duel while a whole bunch of stormtroopers just stand around and watch, instead of shooting one or both of them, who are now both expendable because the ship's gotten away. But this is a boss fight, so they can't interfere because of the rules of the game. Sabine, who now suddenly doesn't give a shit about being with Ezra, goes and wipes out some of the stormtroopers, and then eventually Ahsoka and Sabine run and jump on the ship that Hu Yang fixed in like 15 minutes with no resources. And I don't know why they're running from the troopers, because at this point they've killed like 200 in a matter of minutes. Anyway, they hop on board and they try to catch the hyper ring in their ship, but they don't. So now Ahsoka, Sabine, Baylan, and Shin are stuck in the other galaxy. Shin, who you may have forgotten about in this finale, even though she was the season-long villain, is now with the bandits, and she holds up her lightsaber, so I guess she's in charge of them now because of something. Baylan is standing on the statues of the Mortis gods because he's deep and mysterious, and no one knows what he wants. Ezra makes his way back to Hera. Even though the Great Mothers could sense Ahsoka in hyperspace in a whale, I guess he was just hidden on their own ship somehow. Ahsoka and Sabine are living with the hermit crabs now, so they just switch places with Ezra. I'm assuming so that they can avoid the sequel trilogy and where they were explanation, and they'll just show up after. And we get one more Hayden Christensen cameo as a Force ghost to squeeze every last drop of blue milk out of that alien titty. I think hearing all of it at once really shows how weak the writing and story are. It's just riddled with decisions that make no sense. It's decisions that the characters wouldn't be making. Characters don't really have a personality, they just kind of go from spot to spot. Massive coincidences allow the story to continue. They retcon things like everyone can use the Force now. Because I see a lot of people online supporting this, and I don't know if people really understand the implications of every single person potentially being a Force user. And that's what this show says, because Hu Yang says that Sabine was literally the worst Jedi candidate ever. They waste massive amounts of times with super slow dialogue and huge pauses. There's no real clear goal here beyond we either do want Thrawn back in our galaxy or we don't. And the lessons that are supposed to be learned are what? Sabine was an asshole the entire time, and no one cares. There's no consequences that we've seen yet. Hera disobeys the government, takes her child into a war zone. No consequences because of nepotism and corruption. Ahsoka learned live or die, which I don't even know what that means when she's been living for like 30 years since Anakin became Vader, instead of getting any kind of meaningful closure on their relationship, and just on and on and on. So the next thing that I want to talk about is going to be the characters, and I'm pretty much just going to base it on what we see in this show, and I'm just going to cover all the main ones, obviously. There's about 10. For the characters, I'm going to start with Ahsoka, since it's called the Ahsoka show. Although, let's be real, this easily could have been called Rebels Season 5 or the Sabine show. I'm pretty sure the entire plot could have happened without Ahsoka and nothing would have changed. We didn't really get any good character moments or anything between her and the other characters, so there's that. But apparently she off-screen trained Sabine in the Force and they had a falling out. They try to reconcile and do in the very end, although it's not very fulfilling because we don't really know what the falling out was about, and their reconciliation was just, we're going to be together now. The only change really for Ahsoka is that she goes from gray to white after learning the lesson live or die. I guess she had a little bit more personality after she became white Ahsoka, but it wasn't a very drastic change. She accepted Sabine as her apprentice by the end, but like I said, that felt completely unwarranted and they didn't really resolve anything. Sabine screwed up repeatedly, and she just says she'd always have her back, and that's kind of how they reconcile. Her interactions with other characters were just kind of hollow, and the rivalry between her and Morgan, they tried to make it like this big epic thing because they fought in Mando Season 2 in some village, but they didn't really see each other from that point until the end of this season, as far as I'm aware. So there's really nothing there. And then her duels with Baylan, like I liked the different styles they had with the sabers, and I liked, Baylan was kind of able to overpower her, and she was more speed style, but he was just vague and kind of mysterious with no payoffs. So their duels were kind of also. So what we really got was a whole lot of nothing and some shitty lightsaber fighting. And I don't know if she's not wanting to put the work in, if she's too old, if she just can't do it. But they should probably just get a stunt double to do all the lightsaber fighting for her, and someone who can do a little bit more complex and fast choreography, because it's really hard to watch. And honestly, there were entire episodes without her this season, and I'm not even sure if anyone really noticed. So yeah, that's kind of absurd, I think, for the character of Ahsoka in the Ahsoka show, after we've seen all the development she got in Clone Wars, and then her kind of new role in Rebels, where, let's face it, she probably should be dead. I mean, Dave Filoni created time travel to save her, even though he doesn't call it time travel. On to Sabine. I like Sabine in Rebels a lot. I feel like she's a pretty mixed bag as far as the fans go, whether or not they like her. But they kind of reset her character, and it just made her terrible. Like, she acts like an asshole throughout the entire season, not showing up for the ceremony, where she's supposed to be a respected leader of the rebellion, and a pretty high up figure in Mandalore. stealing the map, losing the map. She pouts with Ahsoka about how the train didn't work out. She doesn't destroy the orb when she has the chance. She finds Ezra and refuses to tell him the truth about how she got there or what the situation is. And then after finally finding him, she stays alone with Ezra. So she's not even going to directly face the consequences of the galactic civil war that she helped reignite. And I could live with not destroying the map if they had gone with a more love story route, but they had Ezra friend zone her in the opening holocron that you see him in. And he calls her little sister, which is also kind of a retcon. In the whole Rebel series, he's hitting on her nonstop. It happens less as they get older, but clearly he has an interest in her beyond friendship. You can find YouTube videos of montages of this. Making her force sensitive, and I think they're trying to build to this new philosophy in the Force that everyone can use the Force. To me, it destroys Star Wars. And I'm going to leave that for the lore part, but I just wanted to mention it because Sabine's the one who does it. Kind of like Ahsoka, though, she serves more to just move the plot along from point to point rather than have any kind of character development or arc or really kind of anything. She's just a vehicle so that we can see different places and different people. Her goal is to find Ezra, and she does. And she doesn't really have much personality or face any consequences. I don't really know what else to say about it. I don't know if it's the actress or if it was the direction, but she gets what she wants at the cost of restarting a galactic civil war. All is forgiven, and now she seems happy in the other galaxy, even though her goal was Ezra, who's now back in the original galaxy. There's not really much for me to make sense of there. Hera could really have not been in this show, and almost nothing would have changed. And it's really unfortunate that I've said that about all of the main characters, but it's the truth. Like, all of them just kind of plug the plot along, but they don't even really do anything. It's just coincidence how the plot moves along. And it's a shame because in Rebels, she was really bubbly personality and kind of a mother figure. And she was the leader of the Ghost and that little group of rebels with her, Kanan, Zeb, Ezra, Sabine, Chopper. And she was great. Like, she could be serious when she needed to. She had a softer side when she needed to. I really liked her. And the contributions that she made in this show were the tracker and finding Ahsoka. And the story could have been very slightly changed and she would have been completely unnecessary. And for some reason, they made her really smug in this. And they kind of try to justify it by saying, well, I'm a general, so I can do what I want. But unfortunately, it just seems like she's kind of doing whatever she wants and is now a corrupt military officer in the new government. And kind of a shitty mom. The internet loved her ass. But beyond that, again, there's just not much to say because she's just kind of a vehicle without much personality or really anything interesting about her. Like, if you ask someone who watched this, how would you describe Hera if you had never seen Rebels? I don't even know what they would say. They would probably just say she's kind of smug, and I guess maybe she's supposed to be a good pilot. And that's kind of it. And that's just too bad because I liked what they did with her in Rebels and her relationship with all the different crew. And she was very good at providing guidance and connecting with Sabine and Ezra, where Kanan kind of struggled with it a bit more, got a bit more frustrated. But there was a good balance there, and just all of that is just gone in this. I wanted to give a shout out to Zeb, since he's just referenced as teaching flight school or something. My guess is that they just didn't want to include him because it would be a ton of CGI. But I like Zeb a lot in the cartoon. He's kind of just the muscle. But him and Ezra had an amusing relationship. Chopper probably had the most personality of the original Ghost crew, which is insane because he didn't have very much screen time. But he's always fun and has a huge body count, I'm sure. I'm going to talk about Ezra, and then we'll get to the bad guys. Because Ezra surprised me. I didn't think he was actually going to show up at all, or until the very, very end. And I felt like the actor was fine. They just didn't give him much to do. And his interactions with Sabine about important stuff either didn't happen or happened off screen. Like, he didn't seem inquisitive at all. He didn't say, hey, like, you're in another galaxy and you found me. What the hell is going on? And I've seen people say that, well, if she doesn't feel like telling you what's going on, that's her right. But is it? He sacrificed like 10 years of his life, which is almost half of his life, and a very good chunk of his youth at this point, to get thrown out of the galaxy. So I think he is owed an explanation as to why she's there, especially when it's at the cost of that sacrifice. So, yeah, I mean, if you didn't know who he was before, I think you would probably describe him in this show as either stupid, naive, or just kind of whipped by Sabine. Pick one. And we really don't get much from him, because I don't really have much to say. I guess you're seeing a theme here, because there's just not much to work with. And I thought that he should have been like, not Luke Skywalker level, but overwhelmingly powerful by the time that we saw him again. If he's going to be engaged in 10 years of guerrilla warfare, surrounded by pacifists against a ton of Imperials and Thrawn. he should have been a badass, and he was just kind of there. The last character I want to mention is the droid, Hu Yang. I like the idea of Hu Yang, but he doesn't really fit into this story. He's got thousands of years of experience and knowledge of the Jedi, and is just gallivanting around as a mechanic and co-pilot for Ahsoka, who's not even a Jedi. And really, he should be with Luke, helping bring back the Jedi Order. Other than that, again, not much to say. I like David Tennant, obviously, but he just kind of lectures Ahsoka and Sabine. They ignore him, and then he ends up in another galaxy where he's now completely useless. So on to the bad guys. Baylan, another character there's not a ton to say about. Ray Stevenson had a ton of presence on screen, but his character just kind of speaks in these vagaries that are supposed to be deep, and all we really know about him is that he escaped Order 66, and he has some kind of fondness for the idea of the Jedi, but he wants Thrawn back. We don't really know why. I guess if you want to do the legwork for the writers, he's into order and structure, but I feel like that's really grasping at straws and kind of doing their job for him. And unfortunately, he ended up being just a walking mystery box. And he probably had the second best lightsaber work behind Anakin or Hayden Christensen. Shin, we know literally nothing about. Baylan took her in after Order 66, presumably because she was a Force user and she trusts him. That's kind of it. I just see people on the internet posting about how hot she is and that she has like 2 expressions the entire show. So there's that. And she also never just force chokes Sabine and kills her. So I guess maybe she's dumb. We can gather that, I suppose. Morgan Elsbeth is another character who wants to bring Thrawn back and doesn't really have much personality. Maybe she knew about the Great Mothers. I guess you could infer that, but sure as hell wasn't put on screen. I have no clue how she would know about them, but it seems like that's what she wanted. And again, there's not really much else to say. She's like the quiet boss lady with Baylan and Shin, and then she's submissive and dies for Thrawn. And that's just kind of where she is. Thrawn was the biggest disappointment for me because I love the newer Thrawn books, and I'm in the middle of the Heir to the Empire books. And the new books are canon. Like they reference Price, they reference the Rebels, they reference Season 3. And the new books are called Star Wars Thrawn, Thrawn Alliances, and Thrawn Treason. I would definitely recommend them if you wanted a more in-depth look at Thrawn, and I think why people were so excited about him, like seeing him in live action. Because if you only saw him in live action and not Rebels or the books, you'd be like, who the hell is this guy? And I liked him in Rebels. He wasn't quite as good as the books, and it would have been nice to see him actually win some battles in Rebels. Even the end of Season 3, when he's gonna win, he gets surprised by the Bendu, which I'm not sure how I feel about some weird Force entity turning into lightning and just raining down lightning on the surface, but whatever. I guess he's technically still won because he found the Rebel base, found the Rebel spy, and they had to flee and go hide elsewhere. As far as the show goes, though, Thrawn is pretty much just an idiot repeatedly. He contradicts himself nonstop. At no point is he successful in his plans. And this is just a horrible way to set up what I'm assuming they want to be the next big bad for the Dave Filoni movie or maybe a season 2 of this show or whatever they're going to do. People are coping and saying, well, he bought them time to escape. If he had left them alone and they were just hanging out with hermit crabs, he probably would have gotten away anyway with wasting no resources. How much time did his plans buy exactly? He delayed Ahsoka by a few minutes in space. He delayed Ezra and Sabine maybe 15 minutes at the cost of how many lives? The whole plot's just absurd, and defending his actions is nonsensical. Not only is he not a genius, he's essentially an idiot. Just lock the ship down, have a couple fighters on patrol, and load up as fast as you can and leave. You don't need to make it complex and send out cannon fire to get killed for no reason. Or throw away Jedi because you have some weird sudden bitterness toward Jedi when you didn't before. And I like Lars Mikkelsen as the voice in Rebels, but he just did not do it for me on screen. You know, there's a reason we have voice actors and actors, and at a minimum, they should have made him get in shape. They were stranded with minimal resources for 10 years, and he's a lifelong military guy. And he was also worried about discrimination in the Empire, so he's always doing everything to his full potential to ensure that no one can question his worth within the Empire. And I just don't believe that he would let himself get fat or even be capable in this type of situation, which he referred to as exile. And they do the thing with Thrawn in this show where everyone just keeps saying he's smart and scary, but he doesn't do anything to reflect it. And the fact that Ezra is alive and not captured, while he says repeatedly how dangerous the Jedi are, is proof enough of that. The fact that he's waiting for Ahsoka and can't stop her from reuniting with Ezra and Sabine, the fact that he couldn't kill Sabine and Ezra while they were alone and didn't use Baylan and Shin as resources, is all just insane. He needs all the resources that he can get to the point where he's working with witches, but then just straight up ditches the Dark Jedi in another galaxy and a few dozen soldiers. He wasn't even able to stop them with a Star Destroyer when they ran directly at it on alien dogs. And he fails to the point where he actually takes Ezra back to the galaxy with him, which is the guy who took him to another galaxy in the first place. I know a lot of people who like Rebels and the books like the portrayal, but he literally won nothing this season. And I know a lot of people don't care about people who haven't seen Clone Wars and Rebels before and what they think. But if this is your introduction to Thrawn, your takeaway would be, oh, he's a generic, incompetent Imperial officer, but he's blue. And to me, that's a huge failing on the part of the writing. The reality is, you're not going to get a ton of crossover from animated stuff to TV stuff to live action stuff, the same way that you're not going to get a ton of crossover from Disney Plus to movie theaters. That's just how audiences work. So I think part of the responsibility of this show should have been to say, hey, this is our new villain, and he's scary as shit. And it just failed in that capacity. Hopefully I didn't forget any characters that mattered. So now I want to talk about the world building and what this show has done to Star Wars' bigger picture. The biggest world building issue for me is the use of the Force in this show. And people are defending Sabine becoming a Force user because of the line, the Force resides in all living beings. But to me, this is just cope, because it ruins all of the Star Wars lore and is setting up that if they actually continue this logic after the sequels, what they're setting up for is a world that will pretty much be Harry Potter in space without muggles. People also keep trying to reference the trials of the Darksaber to say that Kanan alluded to her being Force sensitive because he says, look, Sabine is a capable warrior, in some ways more so than Ezra, but she can't or won't find balance within herself. Until she does, wielding an actual lightsaber is far too dangerous for her. And Hera responds about how she won't commit with a stick in the training, and her family has already hurt her more than a sword could. And she's talking about how Kanan can't see it because she hides it. People are latching on to this line about the Force, and this specific episode and scene, I'm assuming, is what they're referencing, about her not being able to find balance within herself, and taking this to mean that she could become a Jedi. The actual context of this statement in the episode is that she has all these bottled up emotions because she accidentally created a weapon that was used against the Mandalorians and their Beskar armor, and she was viewed as a traitor by her family and people, and now they're under the Empire's thumb. And you can see here, he's saying, you should quit, and she's saying, I don't quit, I never quit. And he's essentially saying that she's giving up because she ran from all the problems and the trouble that she created without trying to go back to her family. And she's saying how she left to save everybody, and she ended up betraying them accidentally. And this is probably one of the most emotional moments in Rebels for the entire series, where she finally gets all this stuff off her chest and opens up to the people around her that care about her. And then she can finally begin training properly to confront her family and possibly step into a leadership position for the Mandalorians. And this training is to help her learn how to wield the Darksaber because it's a symbol of their people, not because she's Force sensitive and becoming a Jedi. So this is a really warped way to interpret this scene, and to extend that all the way to she can become a Force user. And to me, people saying that this was foreshadowing are just grasping at straws because they want to like the show, and they want to see a cool Mandalorian Jedi. And then I've seen people like Star Wars Theory even say that he doesn't like this decision, but then the way that he tries to rationalize it is that she's a descendant of Tara Vizsla, who actually was a Jedi Mandalorian, and she's part of that lineage. And this is preposterous. Tara Vizsla was alive like 1,000 years prior to Sabine. So to use this and say that she has lineage when it's probably been 50 generations, it's just nonsense. It's not even close to the same thing as Anakin being Luke and Leia's father, since they have half of his genes. And even if this argument made sense, then this implies that you have to have a genetic predisposition to it. So can everyone use it, or do you need some kind of lineage or genetic link to the Force? And the way things are heading, if the story picks up after the sequels, I'm willing to bet that anyone who just trains in it can use the Force. So the genetics don't matter at all. If all it takes is practice, then every single person should learn the Force from a young age. This also calls into question the entire history of Star Wars. When the Jedi had more numbers, roughly 10,000 during the prequel era, and I'm assuming similar numbers in the prior peaceful years, they should have been just starting Jedi schools on every habitable planet. Even if you want to say, well, they wouldn't be able to do Force lightning and hold ships and all the crazy stuff, it's still incredibly useful, and Sabine was supposedly the worst candidate Hu Yang had ever seen, and she could still pull a lightsaber to her. She could duel against Dark Jedi, deflect blaster fire repeatedly into people shooting at her, and push Ezra across this couple 100-meter chasm. And think about the fact that Sabine trained for a little bit with Kanan, took a 10-year break, or however long between her and Ahsoka seeing each other, and then over the course of a few days practicing again, she's a full-blown Jedi. Like, we watched Anakin go from child to teenager to adult before he had completely peaked and mastered it. Even Luke took like 3 years before he could get to a high level. And think about what this does to the entire universe. Like, for people who use animals to farm, or need to lift heavy things, or manual labor, where they could enhance their strength and communicate with animals through the Force, it would change the entire universe. This also destroys, and I would say really retcons, the prequels and the original movies. The entire prophecy relied on Yoda and Obi-Wan just waiting for Luke to get older and watching over him to protect him. And this all depends on the Skywalker bloodline and waiting for it to manifest and bring peace and order to the galaxy. So clearly bloodline matters. But why wouldn't Yoda and Obi-Wan have raised an entire Jedi army in secret on Dagobah and Tatooine? They could have literally just taken orphans from around the galaxy or recruited in wild space, or whatever they wanted to do, to just start recreating the Jedi without issue, presumably in one generation. Frankly, to me, this seems like meta decision making, where the creators or the producers or whomever who want to say, well, you don't have to be born special. Everyone is special if they just try hard enough. And to quote Darth Bane, if all are equal, then none is strong. The entire thing that makes the Jedi versus the Sith a big deal is that they're a very select and very small group of people proportionate to the galaxy, and that they're unique. Han and many other people don't even believe the Force is a real thing in the original trilogy. You would also think, because we have seen it manifest when people are stressed out or in tense situations, that Force users would just pop up all over the galaxy. You have trillions of people, or maybe even more, who live there. So mathematically, it's inevitable that there would be thousands or tens of thousands or even more, millions of Force users, if you can just manifest it when you're stressed out, even if you limit it to innate ability. I mean, why not raise the whole clone army to learn the Force? Just a thought. This also just completely negates the midichlorians from episode 1. Like it or not, it's part of canon, and it was a literal biological marker for whether or not people were Force sensitive enough to wield it. And this completely destroys the entire past of all of Star Wars as far as I'm concerned. And if this does actually set up for a Rey movie post-sequels where everyone can use the Force, it is laying the groundwork for some kind of massive good versus evil Harry Potter with lightsabers world, where everyone is part of it and everyone's fighting, and there's just a billion lightsabers everywhere because they look cool. So to me, accepting this retcon that Sabine just used it because she trained hard enough, which is a line that Ahsoka says. She says talent matters, but discipline also matters. And the implication in the context is that if Sabine trains hard enough, she can use the Force. Even when Sabine says repeatedly, she just can't feel it. Like, she can't even move a coffee cup. She can't do anything. So that's my take on the world building as far as the Force goes. My next biggest issue, this is an issue that has spanned Disney Star Wars since Force Awakens, I would say, is what the world building has done to the lightsabers in general, and how they've been defanged to the point where as soon as someone gets stabbed, your immediate reaction is just kind of, oh well, they'll be there later. My next biggest issue with the world building is what's been done to the lightsabers and how they've been defanged to where when someone gets stabbed, your immediate reaction is just, yeah, they're probably alive. At this point, we've seen Reva stabbed through the heart twice, the Grand Inquisitor, Sabine, and Maul have all been stabbed by lightsabers. Maul got cut in half and survived. When you have lightsabers this often and people aren't getting seriously wounded or dying, you eventually just get conditioned to seeing it, and there's no threat there, there's no tension. They've also introduced this move in Disney repeatedly where one person has a lightsaber and one doesn't, and the person without the lightsaber just wins. They do it with Vader versus Reva and Kenobi, which you can see on the screen, Obi-Wan versus Anakin and Kenobi, Ezra versus Shin in this show. If you can beat someone without a lightsaber, why the fuck would you even have one? It's absolutely nonsensical. Now, I want to talk about the amount of lightsaber time on screen versus the consequences to the story and the characters. I'm going to compare Ahsoka to the originals and the prequel trilogy so that you can really see the difference between the two and what I'm talking about. So this season of Ahsoka, we had a lightsaber duel in almost every episode, and it's crazy how inconsequential they were overall. Episode 1, Sabine gets stabbed in a duel with Shin, fine the next day. Episode 2, Merrick runs away when he is dueling Ahsoka. Doesn't really impact anything. Episode 4, Ahsoka versus Merrick. He dies, but he's not really much of a character, so it's not really important. Ahsoka versus Baylan, she falls off a cliff. Sabine and Shin fight, and then Shin just runs away and gets knocked out by Ahsoka, so no real value to that duel. Episode 5, we get Ahsoka versus Anakin, which is all in her mind. Episode 7, Ahsoka and Baylan, she runs away. Sabine and Ezra versus Shin, Shin runs away. And episode 8, where Ahsoka kills Morgan Elsbeth, who no one knows anything about or gives a shit about. Out of all these lightsaber duels, and this is just the duels, I'm not even including times that they use their lightsabers in regular fights, because that would obviously be a lot more. We had 9 duels in Ahsoka in about 6 hours of content. I would argue that if you're being charitable, really charitable, maybe the one where Ahsoka fell off the cliff was consequential because it led to her awakening, even though her awakening was stupid and nothing really changed for her personality. And I feel like even that's being charitable, honestly. But also, if you want to be super charitable, Morgan Elsbeth dying, I guess you could care about, but it literally means nothing because the people left behind in this other galaxy don't matter, which is directly what Thrawn said. And the job of getting Thrawn back is already done. If she had just run away, they would all be stranded there just the same. Nothing really changes. Sabine was fine the next day after she got stabbed, so that's not consequential. And Merrick's death meant nothing because he was just supposed to be a cool looking guy with an Inquisitor blade. The rest of the fights essentially function just to fill time and fill the screen with bright flashing sticks until someone runs away and there's no real impact on the characters or the plot. Now think back to the original trilogy and the duels that they have in those. And not only that, how many times do you even see a lightsaber? In A New Hope, we only see Obi-Wan versus Vader, and Obi-Wan dies / turns into a Force ghost. The other 3 times that we even see one on screen are when Luke finds out about Anakin. He just sees a lightsaber for the first time. Obi-Wan cuts the guy's arm off at the bar, and then Luke trains with it with the shield over his face. In Empire Strikes Back, the big duel is obviously the one where Luke finds out that Vader's his father, and it's Luke and Vader. The other times that a lightsaber is used is when Luke cuts the Yeti's arm off in the snow. He uses it to cut into the AT-AT and throw a grenade in. He used it in training on Dagobah. And that's it for this movie. In Return of the Jedi, the only duel again is Luke versus Vader, and this is obviously the climax of the whole trilogy, where he brings his dad back to the light side and they defeat the Emperor together. Luke uses it to free Han from Jabba, fight off Boba Fett during that whole scene, and then he uses it in the speeder scene. And so my whole point with this is look how sparingly lightsabers were used, and every time they were used, something significant happened both story-wise and fight-wise. In just the duels, Obi-Wan dies, Luke loses a hand, and his entire life is turned upside down, and Luke beats Vader to finally stop the Emperor. Even in the scenes where there aren't duels, significant things are happening in the story. Luke is learning about the Clone Wars and his father. Obi-Wan protects Luke. Luke trains. Luke escapes the Yeti in his fight for survival. He fights off the AT-AT to give them time to escape from Hoth. He trains. He frees Han and Leia from Jabba. Every single one of these is a significant story beat, and because they're used sparingly and for things that are important to the story, when you see a lightsaber come out in the original trilogy, you know it's meaningful. And this can't be said for any of the lightsaber usage in Ahsoka, and really Disney Star Wars in general, where you just assume everything's going to be fine anyway. And to take it one step further, even in the prequels, for all of their flaws, the lightsaber usage was much more beneficial to the story than what we get in Ahsoka. In The Phantom Menace, they use lightsabers to escape from the Trade Federation ships, to buy time from the droids for Padme to escape, and a brief little duel to protect Anakin and escape from Maul on their ship. And the final usage of it is the big duel with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan versus Maul, where it's the fate for Anakin, and Qui-Gon and Darth Maul both die, even though this was retconned later by Dave Filoni. Attack of the Clones. We get the scene where they go after the bounty hunter to protect Padme. Obi-Wan chases after Jango Fett at the clone facility. Anakin kills the Sand People. Anakin briefly breaks into Geonosis to save Obi-Wan. And then obviously the big fight at the end where the Jedi show up and fight the droid army on Geonosis, and the clone troopers are revealed. The only duel, unless you want to count Jango Fett versus Obi-Wan, which isn't really a lightsaber duel, is Obi-Wan and Anakin versus Dooku, and then Dooku versus Yoda, which is all part of the same scene. Obi-Wan gets injured in this scene, and Anakin loses an arm, and Dooku escapes, who's the Separatist leader at this point. Revenge of the Sith. They break into Grievous' ship in order to arrest Palpatine, and we get Obi-Wan and Anakin versus Dooku, except this time Dooku dies. And they use them again to force Grievous' fleet all in this big half-hour opening. The next time, it's used for the famous Hello There, with Obi-Wan versus General Grievous. Grievous dies. Anakin threatens Palpatine with a lightsaber, and then Mace Windu and the 3 other Jedi confront Palpatine. All 4 Jedi die, Palpatine's face is disfigured, and Anakin becomes Darth Vader when he saves him. Then we see Order 66. We get a montage of all the Jedi dying and the executions, and Yoda beheads the clones who try to kill him. Then we see Anakin killing off Palpatine's collaborators with lightsaber, and Anakin kills the younglings, obviously. And then we get the best choreographed duel in Star Wars of Obi-Wan versus Anakin on Mustafar, with Palpatine versus Yoda in the Senate chambers. Obi-Wan thinks that he killed Anakin. Anakin fully becomes Darth Vader, and because Yoda loses, the Jedi lose overall, and Palpatine maintains control and becomes the Emperor. Despite all of the flaws of the prequels, the lightsaber scenes all had meaning, especially the duels, again. And the choreography was the best in the prequels of any Star Wars. I think most people would agree. And I hope that this helps emphasize my point when I say in the original we had 3 very consequential duels in about 6 hours of the original trilogy, which is about the same runtime as Ahsoka, and 7 duels with Saber vs. Saber, or 2 more if you want to count Jango Fett and the really short Qui-Gon vs. Maul encounter, in about 7.5 hours. And Ahsoka had 9 duels in about 6 hours. Only a couple of them people got injured and they recovered immediately. And story-wise, they were pretty inconsequential overall. But I think I talked about the lightsabers enough. I mean, even in Ahsoka, the lightsabers apparently had become so useless that Ezra actually turns down a lightsaber instead of using it to fight. And the last couple of world building things that I want to mention are small. But I want to mention for the Ahsoka show, the fact that Luke Skywalker isn't even mentioned and Huyang isn't with him is just stupid. Luke and Ahsoka met after Mando Season 2, so she knows where he is. And the fact that Luke Skywalker isn't even mentioned, to me, just shows a complete disdain for the character. And it seems like they might just want to kill Ezra and Thrawn, and then let Ahsoka and Sabine live in the other galaxy, and then find their way back once the sequels are over, so they can say, oh, they weren't there because they were in another galaxy. And then whatever they do after the sequels can have Ahsoka and Sabine still in the story. That's kind of how it feels to me. And these are a little bit more subjective, these last couple, but I do want to mention, I just don't know if the Witches of Dathomir is a good idea for Star Wars. Like, I know that they were in the EU, and obviously the Clone Wars and Rebels, they make a brief appearance. But when you introduce this kind of magic, which I know the Force is a form of magic, but what the witches do is really much more on the magical side than what the Force is. I mean, they create legs for Darth Maul from nothing. They make Savage Opress into a beast. They create the Blade of Talzin in this show out of nothing. They're able to bring in zombies. They're able to pinpoint Ahsoka's location in space through their witch magic. Like, it brings a whole nother dimension into Star Wars that just feels out of place to me. And I'm just not a big fan of it overall. And the very last thing that I want to mention about the world building is the way that the Beskar armor is used. Beskar in The Mandalorian has pretty much just turned all the Mandalorians into Iron Man. The Beskar has essentially turned the Mandalorians into Iron Man. Like, it's a neat thing when it's just the helmet or it's just the chest piece. So they still have to fight like they're soldiers trying to defend themselves and not get shot. But what they've done is essentially say, okay, well, they just wear Beskar everywhere and now they can get shot as much as they want. And we see Sabine do this move throughout the show where she literally just sticks her forearm in front of her face. And that's the only time she would get shot in the head. And again, this is another thing where they just ruin the stakes. The scene that I have on the screen right now is from Mandalorian Season 2. He runs straight at a turret in a hallway and gets shot like 40 times. And first of all, this just ignores the fact that there's gaps in the plating and those never get hit. And also, there should be a consequence for letting yourself get shot. It's just really stupid. We see it repeatedly in Ahsoka where Sabine gets shot. It's kind of like, oh, and then just turns around and shoots whoever shot her or hits him with a lightsaber. When you have fights like that, it just dulls it completely. Like, you know that they're not going to get hurt. They're not going to get shot. They're not even really being impacted. I would compare this to like John Wick 1 versus John Wick 4. Where John Wick 1, he's still hiding and trying to be tactical. And when he gets shot, it hurts and he has to leave the fight. Versus John Wick 4, where he literally just runs into a room, holds up his jacket flap, and is invincible. And it just completely takes away all the stakes. And I think introducing it was a colossal mistake. Because now every Mandalorian just fights like they know they're wearing plot armor. I'm just not a fan. And the very last subject of this long-ass video that I might just make into separate parts later is I want to talk about where I feel like they missed opportunities that could have just been tweaked so that we could have gotten some good moments in the show. And unfortunately, a lot of the issue is just off-screening really important moments for the characters. Episode 1 that I mentioned will be the only thing where I do a massive change because it's just the setup, and I think the setup's bad. But the rest of it, starting with episode 2, is just going to be adjustments to the scenes that we got. This isn't going to be a whole fan fiction. It's mainly going to be they could have done a slightly different thing, and I think the scene would have been a lot more interesting, other than episode 1, because the setup is its own thing. The whole first episode, which is like the setup for the season, especially if you want to get more of the normie mainstream Star Wars audience in, I really think the show could have used like a Lord of the Rings style scene where it starts off with a flashback and you get a ton of information in like 5-10 minutes. And this scene could be something like a live action version of the end of Rebels, or they could even tweak it if they want, where we see Thrawn bearing down the Rebels to where they're on the verge of victory, and then Ezra has to sacrifice himself to save him from them. And this would show a regular audience how imposing Thrawn is as the rebellion is being crushed beneath him, and then the bravery of Ezra sacrificing his life as a teenage kid. And then you could get the reactions from Hera and Sabine to show their connection to Ezra too. And obviously you could include more dialogue and whatever, but I think something like that would have really served to help the mainstream Star Wars audience to start the season. And then you can cut to a couple years. We could see Sabine and Ahsoka trying to function as a master and apprentice, and however their falling out happened, we could see it on screen, which is something that even if you saw Rebels, no one really knows what happened. They just kind of vaguely allude to it not working out because of a personality clash. And I think this is a big mistake also to off-screen, because this is kind of the crux of their conflict for the entire season, and it takes place off-screen. I just don't understand why. And I think this would have really set the show up better than just a couple Dark Jedi mowing down red shirts and Ahsoka finding this orb with a map and killing a couple of droids that have nuclear explosions as a self-destruct mechanism. I think having the entire story hinge on this orb is just a colossal mistake, and that would obviously be a huge change you'd have to make. But I could have lived with something, just some exposition of Sabine saying that she's been chasing down hyperspace maps into wild space or whatever, and maybe she's even a bit dark about it and kind of ruthless. And they can do the thing where they say that they calculated the trajectory of Ezra's hyperspace route until a certain point and blah, blah, blah. So then she was pursuing leads on intergalactic hyperspace drives when she accidentally ran into Morgan Elsbeth. Morgan, Balin, and Shin could torture her for the information that she has about the hyperspace routes, and then she ends up giving it to him but escapes and links up with Ahsoka and Hera to get back to the hyperspace ring that she accidentally came across over her years looking for leads into the other galaxy. And that's just pretty much off the top of my head. Obviously, there's a million ways you could do it, but I think doing something like that, you really could have built up a lot of animosity between the villains for the season and Sabine and Ahsoka and Hera, and kind of really gotten everybody involved and seen Sabine's commitment to Ezra, and then she'd have a reason to hate Morgan, Balin, and Shin. And I think it makes more sense that she came across the hyperspace ring looking for leads to Ezra than just Hera and Sabine cut this droid's head off to this one specific plant, and it just happened to have a shipment going right to this hyperspace ring at the same time that they put a tracker on, and it didn't get rid of the tracker before it got to the hyperspace ring. To me, I would have done the setup completely differently. But from this point on, it's just going to be me talking about tweaks to different scenes and things that I think should have been on screen that were off screen. So episode 2, I'm just going to skip, because honestly, it's all kind of pointless, except for the tracker and them finding out about the Imperial stuff happening at the plant. And that doesn't really even lead to anything later. It's not used for evidence or anything. So I'm just going to move on to episode 3. For episode 3, I would have had Hera just have evidence with her from the factory. And I also would have had the council just trust her judgment as one of the Republic's longest and highest standing generals since the beginning of the rebellion. And for Hera, I think it would have made a lot more sense if the council trusted her and then she had to decide whether to go or not. I think it would have been much more suited to her character, because in Rebels, she was the one pushing to join a more organized rebellion so that they could make a bigger difference in the galaxy. And this is the push that she makes because she's like, there's only so much the 5 of us can do. Like, we need resources, we need connections. And if you go the route where she chooses to go legally, I think you could have done a really nice scene between her and Jason where she's torn between her son and her duty. And that's a really basic message that I think resonates with a lot of people. It makes sense for her character. If you want to go a little bit further with that, they could do the whole thing where Jason really wants to go with her and she's like, you're not ready yet, you're still a kid, I've already lost your dad, I can't lose you too, blah, blah, blah. And even just this kind of simple story, I think would be way more in line with her character and much more interesting than what we got. And then you also cut out the government corruption of the Republic. And she wouldn't have to get suspended later on. This is also the episode where we get introduced to the Sabine pursuing the Jedi route. And I think it would have been a much more logical and better arc for her if the lesson of accepting herself for who she was her arc, and not needing to become someone else and not needing to become a Jedi. Because she's already good at a bunch of stuff. She's a good warrior. But obviously this gets undone at the end because they choose to do an everyone can use the Force thing. And depending on what their disagreement was about between her and Ahsoka, because we don't really know, we could have had a nice moment where they reconciled and accepted each other for who they each are. Whatever. Or Ahsoka could do the whole, I was waiting for you to realize that you couldn't be a Jedi and be proud of who you are, blah, blah, blah type thing. Whatever. There's a lot of ways that they could have went with it that weren't, let's make Sabine the Jedi Mandalorian, even though she never used the Force before. The rest of episode 3 is the space fight, and obviously Ahsoka outside the ship was the worst part. The space fight could have been more interesting, even if they had done something like put the whales right at the entry point of the hyperspace lane, or if they had come out of hyperspace closer to the planet, so they weren't just flying in open space, getting shot over and over and over, and the ship is pretty much indestructible until it's convenient for them to get in the center of the hyperring, which for some reason is a blind spot in the hyperring. If the whales had been closer, if they were going to go this route, you could even have a line from Morgan saying like, ignore the whales, just get ready for the hyperspace jump, blah, blah, blah. And then you get a chase scene through the whales. So I keep saying whales, obviously I mean Purrgil. You could even have Shin and the villain pilots kill some of the whales in their pursuit because they're the villains. They don't care about animals and whatever. We could learn something about Shin there. Or you could have her do the opposite where she's trying to avoid hitting him and killing him because it's not necessary. Either way, we would get something from it. And it would make the scene more believable. Like, to me, what they did is like the equivalent of if you're having an on-foot pursuit by guys with guns chasing someone through an open field versus having them run through a city where they can turn down alleyways and run through apartments and climb up ladders and whatever. And obviously, if we went with my version where Hera is here legally, or, you know, we kind of reconstruct the first episode, she could be flying the Ghost and we could see her piloting skills, but we don't really get to see any of that. So episode 4, I don't really have a huge issue with the first fight scene without getting into specifics, which is not what I want to do here. But it would have been nice if maybe they had done something with Ahsoka and Sabine trying to work together in a 2-on-2, and maybe they mess each other up and get in each other's way, and then they decide to work separately because they work better. But, you know, still set it up for later on where they're actually like a tag team. And it also would have been a nice touch if maybe Sabine asked Ahsoka if she could fight Merrick instead because Shin stabbed her already. Or maybe even she was trembling at the beginning of her fight with Shin, you know, because she got stabbed by her like a couple days ago as far as the in-story timeline goes. Ignoring Sabine's lack of force and Shin just not choking her, I do like Sabine using all her Mando stuff here, and it would have been nice if one of them had gotten hurt instead of Shin just being like, see ya. Like, Sabine getting hurt, she could show up after Shin gets back, or if you have Shin get hurt, she would have an excuse to flee. And then there'd be a little bit of animosity between the two because then they had both hurt each other. Especially if they had gone old school and she had cut like Sabine's leg off in the first fight or something and she had to go in the back to tank and get a robot leg and all that. Or, you know, they could have Sabine cut Shin's hand off as Star Wars tradition dictates, and then she could distract her with the Force and run back to Baylan, and we could kind of emphasize how much she really relies on Baylan as this kind of mentor, father figure, protector, because she's not quite coming to her own yet. I think all that stuff could have been nice. I think it also could have been kind of neat if when Sabine had showed up to the fight between Baylan and Ahsoka, if Baylan had the location of the orb and Sabine fought him, but either she had to flee because he was too powerful, or he just fended her off and then got on the ship, and then she could use her jetpack to pursue them and sneak onto the hyperring. And this also would have saved her character from reigniting a galactic civil war just for the possibility of seeing Ezra. And even if you want to go the route of Sabine choosing to give Baylan the orb, I really think would have given it some weight if she admitted prior to this that she was in love with Ezra and couldn't live without him, and she couldn't change her path until she knew for sure that he was gone type thing. But obviously they undercut that with Ezra saying, I've always seen you as my little sister, in his hologram. I know we don't want romance in Star Wars anymore, but I think it would have been really beneficial here. And then you could at least empathize with her desire to be with the man she loves. You know, more than anyone, she's pursued him for a decade. She's exhausted all resources, blah, blah, blah. Instead of just like her buddy. Especially with the reaction that we get when they meet up finally in a couple episodes here. Ahsoka episode 5 is the Hayden episode. And to me, this was the biggest missed opportunity of the series with this dumbass live or die thing. It would have been so much better if in her mind she had been fighting him. And she talks about how she feels like she failed Anakin, and maybe Anakin tells her that he failed everyone or whatever, and that he still believes in her, and she can go, whatever route you want to go with it. It would have been so nice to see an actual conversation here, instead of just him saying live or die over and over. And they could have talked about the great times they had, and what they both wished that their relationship could have become as Jedi and apprentice in the future, and what could have been. Maybe Anakin could ask how Luke was, how Leia was, since the key moment for Darth Vader's arc was choosing to be a father over power. You could even do the thing where Anakin says he will still always be there to support her through the Force, and maybe at this point in the story, when they leave this place, she sees his Force Ghost smiling or whatever, instead of at the very end of the series, which I think makes a lot more sense. And this also would have been a lot more impactful than what we got. And they could even have him fighting against his own urges to turn to the dark side throughout the episode, where he turns dark with the Sith eyes and fights her, and then when he has control of it and he's light side Anakin, he can talk to her. However you want to do it, there's infinite possibilities here. And this episode ended with Ahsoka saying, I hope the Purrgil will take us to the right place. This could have been so easily explained by her telling Hu Yang, oh, I communicated with him through the Force. They said they always follow the same hyperspace route when their life is nearing its end. And with like 2 sentences, this decision makes sense, instead of a joke where she goes, well, hopefully we get there. It's just this kind of dumb stuff throughout the whole season that makes the characters seem like idiots. And for what? Like a half-assed, not funny joke? Episode 6 is another one of the ones that I felt like was a colossal waste of potential. They could have done so many things with it, like if Thrawn had taken Ezra prisoner and Sabine had to figure a way to get them out, or if he was causing them so much trouble when they were all stranded that Thrawn had offered to work together with Ezra while they were stranded because they were already fighting for their lives. And Sabine had to decide whether or not to honor Ezra's agreement until they got back to the galaxy, or just execute Thrawn while she can, even though it's underhanded. They could have gone really dark with it and had Thrawn have already killed Ezra, and then Sabine's entire journey been fruitless. And that would have made Thrawn pretty scary too. Since it went the way that it did, it would have been kind of standard, but it would have been fine for Ezra to jump in here and save her. That's the typical thing to do when you're looking for somebody who's a warrior who's lost. Or possibly they could have had Ezra become some kind of rogue and be a leader of the bandits, where they attack her until he realized who she was, because they haven't seen each other in a decade. And now he's got like this little bandit group that he's running. And this would also help it make more sense that Ezra was able to survive against Thrawn for this long without being killed. You also could do the thing where Thrawn was like, execute Sabine right now. I don't care about your word. And then Baylan has to step in and be like, no, I gave her my word, and that means something. And then they have this kind of power struggle between Baylan keeping his word and Thrawn trying to be efficient and killing people who get in his way. But instead, they do the like mustache twirling villain thing where they're like, wahaha, we can technically keep our word and kill them. Wah. And then you have this part where Baylan and Shin are alone because they're following Sabine. And this would have been nice if he would actually tell Shin what his plans were instead of being mysterious and vague. And then we could have Shin make a decision about if she wants to go with Baylan or carry on to bring the Empire back, or possibly even betray him outright and try to kill him. But instead, we get a lot of vagaries and no one really knows what's going on. It's just all speculation. And then near the end of this episode, there should have been a huge emotional moment when Sabine finds Ezra. And if they had gone the romantic route, like I mentioned, she could have kissed him and really freaked out. But again, no romance in Star Wars. But even still, if they're going the platonic route, she could have rushed him and squeezed the life out of him with a hug and really overwhelmed him with emotion. I mean, could you imagine the relief that you would feel seeing someone that you cared about, who you weren't even sure if they were alive, after 10 years in another galaxy in the wild? I wonder if people who enjoyed this reunion between Sabine and Ezra have watched one of those videos online where some soldier gets back from deployment and him and his family and his wife and kids are all overwhelmed with emotion. You can find videos where even the dog's going crazy because he hasn't seen his owner in 9 months. And they were like, hey, took you long enough. Like, he just got home from the office after a long day of work because he needed to do some overtime. And they've been married for 20 years, not disconnected for 10, unsure of survival for each other. And you could have even done the thing where Ezra is a little bit mad because he's been living with these hermit crab people for 10 years and he's been fighting for survival, and make him a little bit feral, but he's just kind of like space hippie. Episode 7 starts off with Hera's trial, and this would have been a great opportunity to have consequences that could actually be undone pretty easily later on. Obviously, in my version, Hera would have been the pilot legally for Ahsoka and Sabine, but in this one, she stole government resources after disobeying direct orders from the Council and got people killed and ships destroyed. It would have been great if she had actually been suspended here, and then when season 2 or the movie or whatever comes out next happens, we could see her getting released because Thrawn is back. And even though I think the bigger issue is that she actually disobeyed the Council than whether or not she was right or wrong, and instead of finding evidence from the manufacturing plant, she just steals resources. But at least that way, she goes to jail until she's proven right. That's something. There's a consequence for her actions. And I actually think this reinforces her character when she says that she's trying to do what she can to protect the people, that she's willing to go to jail for it because she did what was right, even if it was illegal. And that's way better than this nepotistic, corrupt government bullshit. Because now it makes her, Leia, and Mon Mothma all look bad. Because Mon Mothma says, I know you didn't get approval for that mission. So it's kind of destructive for all of them, character-wise. The next scene is the one where Ahsoka comes out into the minefield from hyperspace. And again, I think the scene could have been easily improved if we just saw a few Purrgil get blown apart and Ahsoka's ship takes damage. And instead, nothing really happens. They all just kind of ignore the minefield. Thrawn pretends like he's smart for not being able to kill her when he knew exactly where she was going to come out of the hyperspace lane. They could have used this to at least damage her ship and then have her flee to the planet surface and the fighters finish off the ship so that she has to crash land. And then this would ratchet up the tension for later of them having to get aboard Thrawn's ship before it leaves, because then they really are stuck with nothing. And instead, they just kind of cruise with the crab people later on to attack the Star Destroyer. We go to Ezra and Sabine, and this would have been a great conversation to have either at the end of the last episode or right now, where Sabine explains everything to Ezra that happened this season, and he gets really pissed off at her and is kind of conflicted emotionally, because he could both be mad at her for undoing the sacrifice that he made, and he spent a decade of his youth, which at this point is almost half of his life, and he could be grateful that she was willing to sacrifice so much to be with him again. Again, this would work better with romantic subtext, but whatever. She also doesn't mention that she believes Ahsoka is dead, which would have been a huge bittersweet moment for him to have Sabine but lose Ahsoka. And then when Sabine hears Ahsoka through the Force, she's a bit confused, and they can both be super happy and relieved when she shows up to save the day when they're being attacked by the stormtroopers and Shin. Like, you could have had all these payoffs just by having them have a conversation on screen. And instead, she just gives like an update like, oh, yeah, the Emperor is dead, supposedly, and like all this bullshit that just leads into the sequels. Also, could have been nice for them to talk about Kanan some and reminisce about some stories they had between the three of them and what it was like training under him and how much of a hard ass he was and whatever. They could even reference some original moments that weren't in the Rebel show, and they just kind of like nod to his existence and then don't say shit. And shortly after this, you get the bandits attacking, and it would have been nice if they killed some of the hermit crab people, or the hermit crab people were actually tricky fighters instead of pacifists. Sabine calls them completely defenseless, and it makes the bandits more threatening and helps justify how Ezra survived if the hermit crabs could fight, because then he's leading a group of warriors who use guerrilla warfare tactics that are a little bit unorthodox. Obviously, again, a million things you can do with it. Instead, the first time we see the bandits, Sabine kills like 12 of them, so they're no threat. And then we don't see a single Noti or hermit crab get killed. And then Ezra fights them literally with no weapon. So all of this just reinforces that the bandits are just garbage. And then once they circle up, there's a massive missed opportunity for Ezra to get his lightsaber back, and you can do the whole dramatic him igniting it thing and the swelling music or whatever. And then him and Sabine just kick ass. I also think it would have been nice here if he was going to turn down the lightsaber, to essentially just have him walk around effortlessly killing bandits without even raising his arms or anything, because he's been so reliant on the Force that he's just become unstoppable with it, at least for the bandits. Maybe not the stormtroopers necessarily. Again, this would have made it a lot more believable that he still put up enough resistance to be alive for an entire decade when Thrawn is his next door neighbor with ships and guns and soldiers. And for the Ezra Sabine versus Shin duel, I think it could have been improved if either Ezra or Sabine had gotten hurt, and Shin had as well. Then Shin could have run off injured and maybe not make it back to the ship and kind of get taken in by the bandits in the finale to survive. Or you could have Ezra or Sabine get hurt and then have whoever doesn't get hurt insist on never leaving the other one behind again. And again, this would ratchet up the tension for the we're not going to make it in time part of the story. And I think it would actually make Thrawn make more sense too, since he already said Shin and Baylan were expendable, to not send any stormtroopers out here and just completely lock the ship down to keep everybody out once all the Jedi are off. Then if you wanted to do the thing where Shin gets hurt, you could have Ahsoka show up, insist on sparing Shin while Sabine wants to kill her, and then they could have their own conflict and disagreement there. I'm not even going to mention Ahsoka versus Balin's duel because it was completely pointless. It stalled her for like 2 minutes, and I don't see why she couldn't land right next to the crabs where she needed to be. So it's just a time filler. And episode 8, the finale. Another missed character conflict / opportunity here. Ahsoka and Sabine reunite, and Ahsoka's just like, nah, you're good, homie. It would have been great if she had given her a lecture about how Jedi are required to think of others beyond themselves, which is obviously a callback to the prequels and just how the Jedi operate in general. And then Ahsoka could follow it with something like, but I understand wanting those we lost back, or whatever, because she lost Anakin. You could tie that whole thing in. And then she could say something along the lines of how if she could have brought Anakin back this way, she might have made the same decision too. And they could come to some kind of understanding with each other. And this would have been a good point if Sabine hadn't become a Force user, for Sabine to accept it, and Ahsoka to tell her she was going to accept her no matter what, that she never needed to become a Jedi like her, and it's okay to make decisions that are best for herself, or whatever. You could have the whole conversation you want. So there's just so much they could have done with this, and they just kind of chill. We get like a half-assed apology and move on. We could also have Ahsoka talk about how she understands that Ezra was her entire life, the same way that the Jedi were her entire life. And if she could go back and stay with them instead of leaving, or she might do it, or she deeply regrets it, or whatever. And she doesn't want to see Sabine have regrets. However you want to have the conversation. But they didn't do any of those things, so there you go. Again, fighters show up, and I just wanted to mention that this is another opportunity to have the ship is beyond repair line to increase the tension on the ticking clock that is Thrawn leaving. Right after this, when they ride the Howlers into the base, it would have been nice if one of them had gotten shot like nearby the door or something and injured, preferably Ahsoka, and then you could use this to justify her staying behind in the end because she can't keep up or doesn't want to hold them back or whatever the case is. When they do break onto the ship, it would have been nice to not just be in another open, flat area and get some kind of interesting environment to fight in. Use some hallways with some columns, have some statues, have some supply boxes piled up, whatever. And we've gotten almost nothing involving environments during the fight this season. A little bit in the woods maybe, and I guess Ahsoka falling off the cliff, but that little area where they actually fought was just a flat circle. So it would have been nice to see some different environments. For the Ahsoka versus Morgan Elsbeth duel, I really wish they would have had like a Force, like a traditional Jedi Force user versus witchcraft Force user part of the fight, instead of like, again, just kind of fighting in a flat area and going back and forth and doing the kind of standard shit. It would have been nice to see how the witch magic versus the Force kind of operates if they're going to include it in the universe. When we get the Sabine and Ezra 2v2 with the special troopers, again, it would have been cool to see them work together and tag team and alternate opponents. Maybe even have him use the lightsaber and her use her Mandalorian shit. And they just kind of do 2 separate 1v1s. So there's not really much inspired there. The Ezra getting tossed across the chasm by Sabine thing, I don't have much to say about. But I kind of wish that she would have chosen to go with him since she reignited a civil war to see him again. And then if this show continues or the movie or whatever, it would have been nice to see her have to live with the guilt and realize the consequences of her actions and that her choice impacted, and that she has to live with that as the show goes on, or the movie or series or whatever. At this point, in the image on your screen, Morgan's mission and the stormtroopers is complete. Ahsoka and Sabine are behind. All of them are stranded there. And I'm not sure if I would like this kind of decision, but at least it would have been interesting if once Ahsoka's ship had been damaged, if it had actually been beyond repair when Thrawn left, the stormtroopers and Morgan could have just put their weapons down and they all could just accept that they had to live here together. And that would have been kind of odd, but it could have been interesting at least. If they were going to give Shin the bandits, they could have had her walk in and cut down a couple, and maybe even the leader, and then force them all to kneel. I don't know why they would really give a shit about her or her authority otherwise, but this would have been something interesting about her character if she was just willing to use straight brutality for power and to control others. But yeah, just something I could throw in there. I mentioned earlier if she had gotten injured and fled to the bandits, that also could have been interesting for her to become one of them because they healed her or whatever the fuck. I don't know if this last scene with Balin was changed because of Ray Stevenson's untimely passing, but it would have been nice to have him say something out loud at the end, like, I'm finally on my way to blah, blah, blah. So we actually know what his goal was for the entire season, instead of just kind of standing there looking off at Mordor or whatever the hell he was doing on the Mortis god statues. Ezra and Hera reunite, and it's probably the most emotion she shows all season. It would have been nice to get a hug or something from her. I would have at least liked to have seen her do kind of the mom thing, where she's like, I can't believe how big you've gotten, look at that beard, blah, blah, blah. Because she was kind of a mother figure to him and the Ghost crew, outside of Kanan, obviously. And it's not a huge deal, but it just would have been nice to see a little something. Like, her emotive reacting is fine, but, you know. Again, for the normies, they have no clue what their relationship was. I really hate the line right here at the end between Sabine and Ahsoka, where Ahsoka says, we are where we need to be. And it would have been so much more justified for Sabine to be upset because she reached Ezra and now he's gone again. And Ahsoka to comfort her and be like, don't worry, we'll find a way home. And to really emphasize that they want to get home to stop Thrawn. Like, they brought him back, they need to go back and stop him. But like I said before, I think they're trying to kind of pad their timeline here so that Sabine and Ahsoka can come back and hang out with the Mandalorian and Rey and Boba Fett and whoever else. I think this is all I have to say, which I know this was a long one. I think this is all I have as far as plot tweaks that I think could have helped. Maybe if I really put a lot of time into it, I could come up with more, or if I just want to do an entire fan fiction, which I do not. But I think a lot of the suggestions that I made could have been incorporated into the show in a way to give it some substance and some character stuff and some conflict and some interesting interactions. It really just felt like every character was just there to plot along so the plot could just keep going, but no one really had a reason to outside of meta stuff. And the show was so flat, and in reality, it could have had throwing it back in like the first 2 episode special, and then the show can go from there. But they drug everything out, these huge pauses in dialogue and stuff. This is it for me for this one. If you're still here for some reason, thanks. Like and subscribe and all that shit. I'll probably put this full video up, and then I think I might put each of the 4 parts as their own video. I wasn't really planning on spending a lot of time on this one, and it ended up just being way more than I had anticipated. So, all right. Thanks. See ya.